Welcome to the Career Refresh Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Griffin. I'm a former media and marketing executive turned career strategist and executive coach. I spent my career working my way up and through the ranks of global organizations and startups, and today I show others how to do the same. Join me each week as we discuss the strategies and actionable steps to leverage your strengths, increase your confidence, and develop your career well-being. Ready? Let's do it. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking with my friend and top recruiter, Susan Gygax. She is a recruiting leader. She's got over 25 years experience recruiting and building large teams. She's also worked in fast-paced entrepreneurial environments and for billion-dollar companies. She is the founder of Spectacle Talent Partners, which is a specialty recruiting firm that provides tailored full-service recruiting. Sue holds a professional human resources certification for the last 15 years, and she's made a reputation for herself by easily moving within multiple industries and rapidly understanding an organization's distinct characteristics. And this really allows CEOs to use speed and momentum to make a great hire. But listen, my friends, in this episode, we talk about why she made the switch from HR to recruiting, the best way to work with recruiters and how to be market ready, how executive coaches and recruiters truly partner to create successful candidates, why an outcomes-based conversation is the formula for your success when you're talking to both recruiters and, let's face it, the potential employer. And lastly, we talk about what she would like to see differently done in the recruiting industry. So give a listen. I'm going to put all of her information in the show notes, and she has also offered, if you have questions, you can follow up with her directly. I appreciate you, friends, so much. And as always, here's to what's possible. Hey, Sue, I've been waiting for this conversation, and I am so glad that you are here. Welcome, my friend.
Hello. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
All right. So let's get into it. I ask all my guests to take us back and tell us, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
Oh my goodness. I had no idea. So back when I grew up in the 80s, I went away to college. I am one of the few of my siblings who actually went away to college, got a 4-year degree in 4 years. I'm fourth out of 5 children. My parents owned a restaurant. My dad got up at 3 o'clock in the morning, made the donuts, worked. My mom worked at the restaurant. So I saw a lot of what I didn't want. And even when I went away to school, I still was very unclear, and for the longest time, only had a very good sense of what I didn't want to do, who I didn't want to be, until I realized the epiphany moment was so random. I took a job, because normally when you go back home, when you go away to school, you work at at my parents' restaurant, because that's what all 5 of us kids did. Yeah. Right. So instead, I worked in HR at a bank, grew up in Connecticut. So back in Connecticut, called Center Bank in Hartford, Connecticut. I don't even know if there is Center Bank anymore. But I worked in HR and fell in love.
Wow. I love to hear more about this, especially about HR, because then eventually you made the transition to recruiting. So tell us a little bit more about what it was with HR that you loved, and then when you decided that it was time to move into more of a recruiting role.
Yeah. So my HR generalist work was very early in my career. I was the sole HR practitioner for a fast-growing manufacturing company way back, and took a turn into talent acquisition because, and I think this might have something to do with my parents' restaurant. Okay. Interacting with people constantly, I saw very quickly that in talent acquisition, in recruiting, is when you were really solving the biggest problems that a company had. Because every organization has people problems at the end of the day. in fast forward to today's modernized technology savvy, all of the things we know about the business world today, a lot of those early problems that we have are solved by technology, which is fantastic. However, so we go into conversations expecting certain things of companies. But at the end of the day, a person wants to talk to another person. They want to talk to somebody who can solve the issue that they're having with your product or the issue that they're having with their customer or whatever it is that you sell in your business. At the end of the day, it's the people sitting in the seats that are making the biggest impact on your ability to be profitable and have raving fans.
So what was it about that switch or thinking about it differently from the HR perspective versus the recruitment perspective that was most attractive to you?
It was to be frontline, being able to bring good people into the organizations that I was working on.
Yeah.
I could see a beginning, I could see a middle, I could see an end. Unfortunately, much of HR, and I love my HR friends, much of HR that they do is very transactional.
Yeah.
Wasn't very strategic. And I love the strategic work of recruiting.
Right. And I also find just from my, as an executive coach from my own travels, that so many companies underfund HR. So they are at times dealing only with we're in a time right now where there's a lot of change in the marketplace. There's a lot of hiring and laying off equally.
Right.
So that we're finding that a lot of the work that HR is doing is just almost doing the strategic business planning versus or benefits management, right? Not actually the role of, how are we growing? How is this a growth organization for our people? What's the training?
Right.
How have you seen some of that addressed with the lack of funding for HR departments and therefore the lack of growth and ability for people to raise up and get promoted and get training and development? How have you seen that all come together?
Yeah, it really, there's so many nuances to every HR department, right? So it comes down to what are the strategic people initiatives and how the work that the HR team is doing aligns to those strategic people initiatives, which align with those strategic business initiatives. So the better that we in HR can get at speaking business, the more effective we are.
I've heard you say this brilliant quote, and I'm going to tell everybody what it is in a second, but I would love for you to unpack it a little bit. And I've heard you say at times that every open position is about a business trying to solve a problem. So tell us more about that and how that impacts recruiting.
Yes. So many times where a job becomes open, it's usually open because it's brand new, right? A newly created position at a growing company, or somebody who was in the role is not effective, or they left. They were effective and they left. So oftentimes there's a gap between what that job was created to do and what that person was doing. So the magic of being a capable and effective recruiter is understanding with your HR business partner, or now in my role as an executive recruitment firm, talking to the decision makers and the stakeholders to understand what is the problem you're trying to solve with this particular role, and then clarifying that in their minds, which translates into the job description, which translates into recruiting. Because people think their job is so super special. And I can assure you, after doing this for well over 2 decades, your job is not that special. And that if you can understand how that job links to the business problem, it will make the job so much more clear, and people will be excited to come in and talk to you about it.
Right. And then that also connects into what I tell, as an executive coach. What I help my clients with is that they have to make sure that the stories they're telling and the experience they're sharing is repeatable, scalable, and transferable, right? So that it meets exactly what you're saying, the business problem. So take us through You eventually left. You started your own recruitment, executive recruitment business.
Mm-hmm.
Through like what you're seeing in this current marketplace.
Yeah. So there's a couple of trends, right? So we've all seen the headlines around technology and the layoffs happening with very tech forward or tech adjacent organizations.
But I also just want to touch on that for a second, because if you look at the numbers, and this is all public data, friends, so you can look if you're curious, right? But if you look at the numbers across Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Salesforce, yes, they have laid off. And yes, if you are part of that group, that is anywhere from painful to joyful, depending on how you feel about the whole experience and maybe the severance package. But if you look at the actual numbers of those that were laid off versus the period that's, we'll call it the COVID period, right? The period of hiring, every single one of those companies netted more new hires than layoffs. So I only say that because when we hear headlines and then the media becomes our reality and then everyone freaks out, there are absolutely people that were affected, and there are people that are affected that aren't going to get severance packages. There are people that are in adjacent businesses that were supporting. They were the coffee shop in the building over the company that was, under the company that was getting with people laid off, right? So people are definitely affected, and I don't want to minimize that. But I also want people to stay grounded in the reality that this is something that unfortunately happens. The culling ends up happening like every 7 years, and we haven't had it in a while. And if you're under, give or take, 45 or 40, you probably have not seen this before. Mm-hmm. And it sucks. Yeah. But it is something that happens. It's intense for like 6 months, and then it comes right back and it gets back into normal. So I just want to round on that and then pass it back to you and tell us what you're seeing.
No, and that's 100% accurate, because in 2020, full stop, everything stopped. So you had all of this backlog, like it just all backed up. And then those organizations that are being most impacted overhired to meet the demand that they suddenly found themselves in. And now here we are, 2023, the market is adjusting itself, right? Now the gates opened and everybody was excited about that, but it was
correction.
I'm sorry?
It's a correction.
It's a correction. And it's in pockets. There are probably more industries that are not impacted by these significant numbers. And as you said, there's in no way minimizes the realities, the difficulties, the hardship that is an unexpected separation from an employer, right? That is difficult, period. Hard stop as well.
But remembering that Amazon, for instance, laid off 18,000, but hired over 700,000 in the same period.
Yeah.
When I say same period, for clarity's sakes, I mean that COVID period, right? Yes, if you're part of that 18,000, I'm sorry, that sucks. But I want for everybody else who's not directly impacted to understand, to have compassion and empathy for those people. But at the same time, don't let the fear and the collective consciousness get into your psyche, because it's going to impact your focus, your determination, and your ability to do your job.
That's right. Ambition is a discipline.
Yes.
I am finding.
Well done. Well said.
And so you have to be very careful about what you allow sort of to take you away from some of those disciplines that come with ambition. And I mean healthy ambition. I don't mean the ambition that drives people to behave poorly, but healthy ambition. Yeah.
So let's take us back to some of the success myths that you are seeing. I think that would be a really helpful conversation for people to learn about.
Yeah. Well, I think when I think back to my early career, I thought success was a straight line. I went from this job to that job to that job, because that's what and LinkedIn, it kind of makes you feel that way as well, right? You sort of think, okay, you did this, you did that, but in between all of those places, chances are you took on projects outside of the scope of your job. You made sacrifices with your family, right? I remember literally standing in line in Disneyland, taking a call from my CEO, even though, he knew I was on vacation, and my husband was like, "What are you doing?" And like, I have to step out of line. I need to take this call,
Yeah.
which is not okay. And I shouldn't have taken the call. But those
culturally, that was what was expected.
That was the choices that we made, right? So success is not a straight line. And I find that those of us who could maybe from externally look and say they are successful, we think that being successful is going to make us happy. And success is an inside job.
Yep. Beautiful. Right? There are three things, right? Success is not a straight line. Success doesn't necessarily make you happy, and success is an inside job. Beautiful. When you think about like the changes you would love to see, again, you were HR and now you were internal recruitment, now you're external recruitment.
Yeah.
And, you and I have had a couple of conversations offline about, recruiters don't always have the best reputation, and how today a lot of candidates are like sticking it back to recruiters with ghosting them, right? So that's one of the trends that I'm seeing. So talk to us about, how, I know you're different, but talk to what you're stand for and how you're advocating for changes in the marketplace that way, but also what we can all do better.
Yeah, I love this conversation because this is how change happens, right? This is how change gets started. So recruiting, generally speaking, has a very easy point of entry. It's very easy to become a recruiter versus many other jobs that any organization has. So many people, and I hear this all the time, I fell into recruiting. And so because of that, unfortunately, there are lots of recruiters who have not taken the time to hone their craft. And that's one of the things that I take very seriously. I don't take myself very seriously, but my craft I take very seriously. And so they have not honed their craft, and they sort of been successful almost by default because they have certain tools and they have certain systems and there's safeguards in place. And what has transpired over time is, in some instances, recruiters, because they haven't done the work of being externally focused, we got too wrapped up in our own metrics, in our own numbers, and some of those things that felt good for us, but did not feel good for the people that we were supposed to be helping and supporting and partnering with. And so modern recruitment, and I base my firm on this, which is why I love this conversation, modern recruitment should always have a people-centric approach, which often means transparency. Let's democratize. I can't say the word right now. Let's make information available. There you go.
Okay.
Right?
You said transparency, democratization.
Yes. The other thing is
wait, I'm going to ask you to unpack. So transparency sounds clear, but explain to everybody what you mean by that.
Transparency meaning the mutual sharing of information. I cannot tell you how many times people have said, well, I dropped out of a recruitment process when I found out what the salary was. Why the heck were you in a recruitment process not knowing what the salary was?
Well, and I think there's 23 or 25, some states, some locales, like New York City, but not New York State, have mandatory that the salary bands must be posted.
Those laws are out there. Those regulations are out there. Absolutely. Not every company is following them, number one. Number two, if I tell you the job is somewhere between 175 and 250, how much does that help you?
Well, if you're working with a good recruiter or executive coach, it helps you. But if you're right out there, yeah. I mean, and one of the podcasts that I'm going to put out shortly is, and it's surrounding a workshop on negotiation and really understanding how to work within some of those bands. So we're not going to have time to go deeper into that today. But you're right. That's such a wide band.
But it's just asking it's having the conversation up front, early in the dialogue.
And what does a 175 person look like versus a 250? What are you expecting? And asking those questions.
Right.
And if the recruiter doesn't know, I would push them back and ask them to go find out, because it's important for everybody's time and resources.
Yeah. And on the flip side, I have had people tell me they refuse to tell me what their desired salary is. Right. And in those instances, I have the same conversation. I would love to be able to push you forward. However, I'm obligated to understand what that is in order to be able to represent you effectively. Once you're comfortable with that, would love to have a further conversation.
Okay. So that goes back to, again, the mutual transparency, where, again, for years, recruiters have had the reputation of ghosting individuals while employees have been, and candidates have been fighting back over the last couple of years and ghosting them back. That kind of behavior doesn't lend itself to transparency or good strategic partnership. So
that's right. Respect on both sides. Respect is free, right? Sides. Respect is that one thing that is free. It never runs out. It's not something you have to pay for. It's just something that we give and then we get back.
Yeah. And then you talked about the democratization. So tell me what that means in this space.
It's difficult to ask for respect from somebody that you've never spoken to before when you have not shared with them all the information you can share with them. So that doesn't mean everything can be shared all at once, all the time. Right? There are certain things that are confidential. There are layers of confidentiality that sometimes make sense. But in order to put you in enough of a safe environment so that you feel like you can make an informed decision and I can make an informed decision, we should be able to share information to make it a win-win conversation, win-win engagement, win-win negotiation, whatever that is. And a lot of that has to do with sharing that information up front. I have told people very early on in recruitment processes, I've appreciated the dialogue. Here's why I don't think you're the ideal candidate for this particular search.
Okay.
Never once when I said that to somebody did they say, that's preposterous. That could never be.
Because you gave them information as to why.
Because I gave them information as to why.
What the company was looking
for. That democratization in practice.
That's what you mean. Okay. Really helpful. So you and I have also talked about this concept about being market ready, and work I do as an executive coach. I personally don't write resumes, but I work with my clients on tearing down and rebuilding their resume, getting their LinkedIn profile ready, meaning my client does the work, but I'm guiding them every step of the way and making sure that even down to, they haven't prepared for some of the obvious questions they're going to get based on what they have on their resume. Like, how do you explain that gap? I don't think having a gap on your resume is a big deal, but if you think it's a big deal, that's going to show up in your energy and you're going to be weird when they ask that question, right? So we want to make sure that we're practicing things. So I love, like, you and I, as we work together, like when I have great candidates that are coming through my executive coaching, kicking them over to you and vice versa. But tell our listeners, in order to be market ready, in order to prepare for the recruiter, in order to have the best experience possible with the recruiter, what should they be doing?
Well, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, because success is an inside job first. And by working with an executive recruiter, which I love when folks coming to me talking with a talented executive recruiter, because they're coaching or executive coach.
Yeah.
Executive coach, because coaching is one of those things that can have an easy point of entry too.
Oh yeah. You don't need to be certified. You can just call yourself a coach.
You just call yourself a coach.
I mean, I have 6 certifications and a lot of hours.
But not everybody does, but they call themselves a coach.
Yeah. And someone recently said, like, there's all these COVID coaches that have popped up, right? Like, I got it. People are looking for changes, but like, you need to have the training, because I've heard it say, like, with coaching, you can cause great damage and great success. You have that power. So you want to.
Absolutely. So when somebody has worked with a multiple certified coach who really understands their world, right? So your background in corporate informs the way in which you coach.
Yes.
And I think for someone who works with corporate partners, that is a compelling differentiator, because it's one thing to be able to feel as though you're ready for the market, whatever you perceive that to be, but are you ready for the corporate buyer in this instance, right? Being the person who's looking to hire you, have you position yourself in order to be able to have that conversation effectively, which is the work that you do.
So working with an executive coach is your recommendation. What else do they need to be market ready? And to be clear, the executive recruiter is going to help you with the last mile. They're going to help you across the finish line. That said, having some of your pieces in order will help the process move faster. So what are the types of things that you like to see, Sue, that would really help,
when people have a list of job titles based on what they've done in the past and they think they can do, it dilutes their ability to stand out. So if somebody said sales executive, revenue operations, business development, it's all related. But when I think about the problem my company is trying to solve, those are very different, related, but very different primary responsibilities. So which one of those do you really want to be? If you want to be revenue ops, then tell me the story about revenue operations, because they work with marketing. They very much internally focused, numbers driven, being able to have that dialogue, create trainings, create roadmaps, all that stuff, versus business development, which is very externally focused. You spend very little time internally. You spend majority of your time meeting new people, finding out who it is that you need to talk to, creating relationships, developing long-term plays on behalf of your potential, on behalf of your company. Yeah. These are very different skill sets, and people think it's fine because they're related. But I know as a recruiter, because I know the problem my company is trying to solve or my client is trying to solve, that actually works against them.
Yes. Okay. So I want to come back and go deeper on that. So what we're saying, friends, is that adjacency does not get you across the finish line.
Correct.
Right. So whether you work with a mentor, a friend who's a skilled writer, whether you like storytelling yourself, you have to be able to tell that career narrative. Again, this is work that career strategists, executive coaches do. But again, if that's not for you and you want to do it by yourself, you have to be able to tell, again, why what you've done before is repeatable, meaning I did it once before, I can do it again. It's not a fluke. How it's scalable. I worked in a small company, it can scale to a large company. I work for a large company and it can scale to a small company. I hear that a lot, where people want to go into a smaller company and they're often dinged and told like, yeah, but you're only used to knowing how to do something with gajillion-dollar budgets. Like, we don't have that. You're not the right fit, right? So you need to be able to tell that scalability story, and transferable if you work in healthcare. And depending on what the role is, we're not talking about clinical. We're not talking about a doctor or a nurse, something in clinical. But if you work in the healthcare industry and you want to transfer to finance, how is your story transferable? How is working in business and legal affairs for both of those similar? Mm-hmm. You don't have those parts of your story down. The executive recruiter can help you finish the story. But they're busy people. They're looking at so many resumes to fill the hole the need the business has fast. And if you're waiting for someone else to tell the story for you, you're slowing down the process. And you also might find someone who says, you know what, you're great and all, but I don't have time for this. Right? They're gonna kick you back. And that's why doing that work, again, whether you're doing it with someone like myself or doing it on your own, there's books out there you can read, there's websites, there's podcasts. You can do that work and nailing that narrative. So adjacency does not get you across the finish line.
It does not. The other thing I would say is know your numbers.
Okay. Tell us more about that.
Know your numbers, because it's well established that there are no generally accepted principles when it comes to titling. So I could be the VP of a rowboat or the VP of a steamship, and you have no idea which one I was the VP of, unless I knew the company, or unless we get on the call and have a conversation, and then the recruiter has to work really hard to try and extract that from you. What did your team look like? What's the scope of control? What purview did you have? If you know your numbers, it lends credibility to every single success story that you would like to tell.
Okay. Yeah. Right. And again, I can see that coming down to knowing your numbers from the salary, doing your research in your industry, asking around. There are a lot of places right now, and I can't think of them all off the top of my head, so I'll put them in the show notes. But there are places right now that are tracking salary beyond the salary.com and the Glassdoor. There are independent people, even some within the advertising industry world, that are having like an anonymous Google Doc and like tracking salaries. So again, directionally, it's not going to be 100% factual, but directionally making sure that you have that, making sure that you have the numbers of the impact you've created. What I'm seeing also is that seeing resumes where people are like, I did this. And it's like, okay, great. But I need to understand the impact that you made by doing that. So you ran marketing, you did this campaign, you did this thing.
Don't care.
So that, tell me the ROI, tell me the impact, tell me what changed as a result, complete the sentence. And again, those are some of the trends that we're seeing where the marketplace, especially in the current climate that we're in right now, the marketplace is really making sure that you're able to tell the story of how your skill delivered the impact, not just that you're a brilliant marketer, which is important, but you have to drive impact.
Right. It's an outcomes-based conversation.
Yes.
Right. Every resume, and I look at a ton of resumes, and when people are open to feedback, I will share with them that their resume should be outcomes focused. It doesn't matter how long it is. It surprises me how many executives I talk to are like, well, I didn't want my resume to be more than 2 pages. Why? You've got a successful story to tell. Right. No recruiter anywhere has ever looked at a resume and said, oh, I would have called Jill, but her resume was 2.5 pages long.
Right. And again, for listeners,
we hamstring ourselves with these silly, old, dated, archaic sort of models. But again, this information is out there and it can be very confusing, which is why an executive coach, again, can be very useful. But a resume that is outcomes focused, they told me current state was X, I did Y, outcome was Z. I can then have a very informed conversation about that and bring that back. And guess what? I advocate for you.
Exactly. Yes.
I advocate for you.
Because they need your numbers.
Can't even count the number of times I've said to a senior leader, don't put too much stock in this resume. Trust me, talk to this person. And
I will tell you, one of my best hires ever when I was in the agency world was a man whose resume was very unconventional for the role. And the woman that handed it to me was like, just talk to him. And one of my best hires, most successful, ridiculously talented individual who had a very unconventional resume and very unconventional experience.
And that can work very much in your favor, as long as a recruiter can then fill in the blanks of, this is how this person solves that problem we're trying to solve. It may not look exactly the way you thought it might look, but I'm telling you, talk to them.
Outcomes-based. Awesome.
Outcomes-based.
All right. So my last question for you, because I know people are going to ask and want to know this too. When in this marketplace,
yes,
assuming you have an outcomes-based resume, there's still competition. It still can have somebody else who can have very similar experience to yours and similar stories to tell. And assuming all things being equal, then we're going to probably lean on qualities, attitudes, and attributes to decide between the two candidates. What are the things that you're seeing that employers are looking for right now?
Well, I would say, interestingly, when you look at the numbers from a quality of hire perspective, which is one of those HR metrics that we talk about, most often people who are unsuccessful as a new hire, meaning they don't make it past their 90 days or not past the 12-month mark, are usually unsuccessful because of their people skills, not because of their technical skills. I do not use the term hard skills and soft skills because I don't think it's very effective. So your technical skills are the things that you do, the things that you know, your marketing experience, your technology experience, whatever that is. But your people skills is really where businesses are hanging their hat to be able to say, can this person work with these 5 people that we know in the business this person is going to have to work with? Those are very real conversations. And so as you can, within that dialogue with that recruiter, whether they be a corporate recruiter or an executive recruitment firm, to the extent that you can insert how your EQ, what's unique about you, your values-based decisions impacted that, will very much play a role in whether or not you move forward in that particular process. And I do not believe in scarcity of talent. I don't buy into scarcity of talent. I think companies become their own worst enemies, and that's why they perceive there to be a scarcity of talent. But if you do all of the front end work to be able to be in a position to tell that story to the best of your ability, because let's face it, women especially, we don't like talking about ourselves. You have to get comfortable talking about yourself and do that to the best of your ability, and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. Take time to reflect, take time to understand that, but know that there is going to be another opportunity right around the corner, because you're doing that work in order to be able to answer that question.
Right. Okay.
How you're different.
I have one more question and then
Yes.
I'll let you go. So my last question is, you are hired by the employer.
Correct.
Often people come to me in my side of the business saying, like, I need to know the recruiters. So how would you recommend someone, I mean, do they get in contact with you? Do they follow you on LinkedIn? Like, how do they get noticed by the recruiter? Because again, your role is to represent the company.
Mm-hmm. So it depends on a couple different things. So for most of the folks who listen to you, who follow you, who work with you, we are talking about executives, folks who have however many years of experience, track record of success. And there's oftentimes less of them. So there is a better opportunity to, yes, find that recruiter if you can, find them on LinkedIn. Sometimes they'll connect with you, sometimes they won't. In a corporate recruiting space, candidly, it seems strange because there's so many people laid off. A significant number of HR and TA people were laid off as well, but that work didn't go away. They're underwater.
Yeah. Okay.
So connecting or potentially trying to connect with that recruiter is a great potential. Another great potential is networking with somebody else in that business, or somebody that you know who knows somebody in that business.
Okay. Yeah.
People like me, so I'm in the midst of updating my website. I actually put it out there. If you think that you may be interested in exploring what's out there, I make it very easy for executives to open up the dialogue and have a conversation with me. So if you're actively looking, if you are happy where you are, but you don't want to close the door on a potential opportunity, or if you just aren't sure about what's happening in the market because you've had your head down doing a lot of work and now you're like, I kind of see the end of the road here. Let's talk about that. Might be 6 months out, but let's talk about that. I'm the recruiter who has that conversation with you so that you can pick up the phone, give me a text at the drop of a hat to have that very personal dialogue, very confidential dialogue in real time, so that you don't feel like flat-footed once you realize it may be time for me to think about making a change. Or in today's market, unfortunately, you found out and now have zero notice, and now you need to do something.
Okay.
That's the value of knowing someone like me.
Helpful. Really, really helpful. So this has been a treat. I'm going to put all of your information in the show notes so they can follow you on LinkedIn and check out your website and know where to get in touch with the top recruiter.
Yeah.
I thank you for being here and shedding some light on some of the myths, some of the successes, what they need to do to help people in this marketplace figure out what's next for them. So
what's next for them? Absolutely. Perfect. Jill, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully everybody found this helpful. And if they have any follow-up questions, if you get hit up with questions, let me know. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. I will do that. All right. Thanks. Hey, thanks for listening to the Career Refresh podcast. If you're enjoying this and you want more information, go to my website, jillgriffincoaching.com. There you can find information on how to work with me one-on-one or my group programs, or even bring me into your workplace. I'll put the link to my website in the show notes. But hey, listen, before you go, do me a favor, rate and review this podcast because it definitely helps me get the word out to people everywhere so that they can also thrive in the workplace. All right, friends, I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.